The bolt cutter slipped from Dutch Vanderberg's weathered hands, clattering onto the Nebraska dirt as his 75-year-old knees buckled beneath him. There, chained to a rusted metal stake under the merciless August sun, lay a German shepherd so emaciated her ribs showed through matted fur. But it was the purple heart collar around her neck that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just any dog. The shepherd's amber eyes locked onto his with desperate recognition, and beside her a tiny puppy whimpered weakly, too dehydrated to cry. Dutch's hands trembled as he reached for the collar, his vision blurring when he saw the faded inscription beneath 15 years of prairie dust and dried blood. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice cracking like autumn leaves. "Bella?" The dying dog's tail managed one weak thump against the earth, the same tail that had wagged goodbye to his son David at Camp Pendleton 15 years ago, the day before deployment. The day before everything changed forever. How was she still alive? And who had done this to her? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dutch Vanderberg had survived 3 tours in Vietnam, buried his wife Martha after 47 years of marriage, and watched his only son's flag-draped coffin lowered into Nebraska soil. But nothing had prepared him for the hollow ache that settled in his chest each morning when he poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then remembered Martha wouldn't answer when he called. "Coffee's ready, sweetheart." The 4,200-acre cattle ranch that had been in the Vanderberg family for 4 generations now felt like a tomb. At 75, Dutch's calloused hands still worked the fence lines and fed the remaining 30 head of cattle, but his heart had gone out of it when Martha passed from COVID 3 winters ago. The bank notices stacked on his kitchen table told the story his pride wouldn't let him speak aloud. His $1,247 monthly veteran's pension barely covered the mortgage, utilities, and feed costs. Dutch stood 6'2" in his worn Wranglers and flannel shirts, his silver hair still thick beneath his John Deere cap. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star gathering dust on the mantel bore witness to the young Marine who'd carried wounded men through rice paddies. But his neighbors in Cedar County knew him simply as the quiet widower who kept to himself since Martha died. The walls of their modest ranch house held 47 years of memories frozen in faded photographs. Martha in her wedding dress, radiant at 22. David in his high school football uniform, then later in Marine dress blues at graduation. The final photo, David and his canine partner Bella at Camp Pendleton, sat in a place of honor beside the folded American flag. Dutch had stared at that photo every morning for 15 years, wondering if Bella had suffered when the IED took his boy. His son David had been everything Dutch hoped to pass on to the next generation, strong, principled, devoted to service. The boy had inherited Martha's gentle heart and Dutch's stubborn determination. When David enlisted after 9/11, Dutch felt proud and terrified in equal measure. When the casualty notification officers arrived at his door in November 2009, Dutch's world shattered into pieces he never quite managed to reassemble. The ranch that once bustled with family gatherings now echoed with silence. Dutch's daughter Rebecca had moved to California after a bitter argument following Martha's funeral, taking his 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jake, with her. "You never had time for us when David was alive," she'd screamed through tears. "Now you want to play grandfather?" The words cut deeper than any shrapnel ever had. Each day followed the same routine, morning coffee and conversation with Martha's empty chair, checking cattle, mending fence, and falling asleep to the Weather Channel. The mailbox brought only bills and bank warnings about the overdue mortgage. Dutch had considered selling, moving to senior housing in town, but this land held too much of his family's blood and sweat. On this particular August morning, driving his battered Ford F-150 to check the south pasture fence line, Dutch never imagined his carefully ordered world of grief and routine was about to explode. The heat shimmered off the gravel road as Dutch's pickup truck bounced over the cattle guard, heading toward the damaged fence line he'd spotted yesterday. The August sun had already climbed high enough to make the steering wheel burn his palms, and he could see his small herd clustered under the cottonwoods near the stock pond. Everything looked normal until he crested the small rise overlooking the abandoned Hartley property. That's when he saw them. Dutch slammed on the brakes, dust billowing around the truck as he squinted through the windshield. About 50 yards off the road, something dark was moving near an old fence post. His first thought was injured cattle, maybe a calf caught in wire. He grabbed his binoculars from the glove compartment and focused on the scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A German shepherd, so thin her hip bones jutted through matted fur, lay chained to a heavy metal stake driven deep into the hard pan. The thick logging chain around her neck had rubbed the hair away, leaving raw, infected wounds that flies swarmed over, but it was the tiny bundle pressed against her belly that made Dutch's hands shake as he adjusted the focus. A puppy, maybe 6 weeks old, was trying desperately to nurse from his dying mother. The little one's ribs showed through his fuzzy coat, and his plaintive whimpers carried on the hot wind. The mother dog's tongue lolled from her mouth, her breathing shallow and rapid. Dutch could see she'd tried to dig a hole in the packed earth, probably seeking cooler ground or water, but the chain kept her tethered in the blazing sun. "Jesus Christ," Dutch whispered, grabbing his bolt cutters and a gallon water jug from the truck bed. His Vietnam-trained eyes scanned for threats as he approached, but whoever had done this was long gone. The dog watched him with amber eyes that held no fear, only desperate hope that made his chest tighten. As he knelt beside her, Dutch noticed the collar, military issue, with something metallic catching the sunlight. His breath caught when he saw the Purple Heart medal attached to the leather, tarnished but unmistakable. This wasn't some farm dog. This was a military working dog, and someone had left her and her pup to die in the Nebraska heat. "Easy, girl," Dutch murmured, using the same gentle tone he'd used with wounded Marines 4 decades ago. "I'm going to get you out of here." The shepherd's tail gave the weakest possible wag, and she allowed him to pour water into his cupped palm. She lapped desperately while Dutch examined the chain. Military-grade, heavy-gauge steel that had been professionally installed with a padlock. Someone had planned this torture carefully. The puppy whined and pressed closer to his mother as Dutch worked the bolt cutters. Sweat ran down his face as he struggled with the thick links, his 75-year-old hands cramping with the effort. When the chain finally parted with a sharp crack, the shepherd tried to stand, but collapsed, too weak to support her own weight. Dutch's military medic training kicked in. He checked her pulse, rapid and thready. Her gums were white, indicating severe dehydration and possible internal bleeding. The puppy wasn't much better, crying continuously now that his mother couldn't provide comfort. Dutch made a decision that would drain his meager bank account but felt as necessary as breathing. He gently lifted the 40-pound dog into the truck bed, cushioning her on an old blanket while the puppy climbed up beside her. As he started the engine, Dutch noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt nearby. Someone had been here recently. The tracks led north toward the highway, but Dutch's priority was getting these animals to help. The nearest veterinary clinic was in Columbus, 45 minutes of hard driving on rural roads. Dutch called ahead on his flip phone, explaining the emergency to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who'd treated his cattle for years. "Dutch, I have to warn you," she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. "Emergency treatment for 2 dogs in this condition could cost $800 to $1,000 minimum." Dutch looked in his rearview mirror at the shepherd, who had managed to curl protectively around her puppy despite her weakness. The Purple Heart caught the sunlight again, and he thought of David's final letter home. "Dad, these dogs save more lives than you'd believe. If something happens to me, take care of Bella. She's got more heart than any human I've ever known." "Do whatever it takes, Doc," Dutch said, pressing harder on the accelerator. "Money's no object." It was a lie, but one he'd worry about later. Right now, 2 lives hung in the balance, and Dutch Vanderberg had never walked away from a fight worth having. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she examined the German Shepherd on the stainless steel table, her face growing more grim with each discovery. "Dutch, this dog has been chained for at least a week, maybe longer. She's severely dehydrated, malnourished, and these neck wounds are badly infected." She paused, studying the Purple Heart collar. "This is military issue. Where did you find her?" Dutch explained the scene at the Hartley place while Dr. Mitchell started an IV line. The shepherd's eyes never left Dutch's face, as if she recognized something in his bearing that spoke to her military training. "Doc, there's something else," Dutch said, his voice tight. "When I was cutting the chain, she looked at me like she knew me." Dr. Mitchell carefully removed the collar to clean the infected wounds beneath. As the leather separated from the metal, something small and metallic fell onto the examination table with a soft clink. Dutch's breath caught as Dr. Mitchell picked up a pair of military dog tags, green with age and partially corroded. "Well, I'll be damned," the veterinarian whispered, reading the engraved text aloud. "Bella, German Shepherd, service number K92847, handler CPL David Vanderberg, USMC." She looked up at Dutch, whose face had gone white as Nebraska winter. "Dutch, this says David Vanderberg. That's—" "My son," Dutch finished, his voice barely a whisper. His knees gave out and he sank into the plastic chair beside the examination table. "But that's impossible. Bella died with David in Afghanistan 15 years ago. I have the report, both KIA, November 15, 2009. Dr. Mitchell frowned, studying the tags more closely. "These are definitely authentic military issue. But Dutch, if this dog died 15 years ago, who's this?" She gestured to Bella, who had lifted her head at the sound of David's name, her amber eyes suddenly alert despite her condition. Dutch's hands trembled as he reached out to touch Bella's head. The moment his fingers made contact, the dog's entire demeanor changed. Her tail began a weak but determined wagging, and she struggled to sit up despite the IV line. "Bella?" Dutch whispered. "Is it really you, girl?" The dog's response was unmistakable. She pressed her head against Dutch's chest and let out a low whine that sounded almost like crying. In that moment, 15 years of grief and questions crashed over Dutch like a tidal wave. If Bella was alive, what else about David's death had been wrong? Dr. Mitchell's voice cut through his emotional fog. "Dutch, I need to focus on saving her life right now, but we need to figure out how a supposedly dead military dog ended up chained in a Nebraska field." She moved to examine the puppy, who was slightly stronger after receiving fluids and puppy formula. "This little guy isn't in immediate danger, but he's severely underweight." As she worked, Dutch studied Bella with new eyes. Beneath the matted fur and infected wounds, he could see David's dog, the same intelligent amber eyes, the same distinctive white blaze on her chest, the same protective instinct as she kept watching the puppy despite her own pain. But how had she survived? And who had kept her alive all these years only to chain her to die? The clinic door chimed as Dutch's neighbor, Earl Thompson, entered carrying a cardboard box. "Dutch, I heard on the scanner you had an emergency out here. Brought some supplies." Earl stopped short when he saw Bella on the table. "That's a fine-looking German Shepherd, even in rough shape. Military bearing, I'd say." "Earl," Dutch said slowly, "meet Bella. She belonged to David." Earl's weathered face showed confusion. "But, Dutch, didn't David's dog die with him in that explosion?" He set down the box and approached the table cautiously. "I remember the memorial service. You said both David and his canine partner were killed." "That's what I was told," Dutch replied. his voice hardening as the implications sank in. "But if Bella's alive, someone lied to me. Someone's had my son's dog for 15 years and let me believe she was dead." Dr. Mitchell finished her examination and began preparing surgical instruments. "Dutch, I need to operate immediately to clean these wounds and remove infected tissue. It's going to cost about $800, and that's just the start. She'll need ongoing care, antibiotics, proper nutrition." She hesitated. "Do you want me to proceed?" Dutch looked at his nearly empty wallet, then at Bella, who was watching him with David's same trusting expression. "Doc, that dog was my son's partner. She protected him, comforted him, probably saved his life more than once before." He swallowed hard. "Do whatever it takes." As Dr. Mitchell prepared for surgery, Dutch's mind raced. Someone had kept Bella alive for 15 years. Someone knew the truth about what happened in Afghanistan. Someone had recently chained her to die, but why now? What had changed? Earl put a hand on Dutch's shoulder. "I'll call Pastor Williams and the church ladies. They'll want to help with expenses." He paused. "Dutch, if this dog really belonged to David, finding her alive after all these years, that's not coincidence. That's providence." Dutch nodded, but his jaw was set in the determined line that Martha had learned to recognize over 47 years of marriage. "Earl, I'm going to find out who did this to her, and I'm going to find out why the military told me she was dead." The first battle was saving Bella's life. The second would be uncovering the truth about his son's death. The surgery took 3 hours, during which Dutch wore a path in Dr. Mitchell's waiting room linoleum. Earl had called Pastor Williams, who arrived with half the Lutheran church ladies and enough casseroles to feed a platoon. By the time Dr. Mitchell emerged, wiping her hands on a surgical towel, word had spread through Cedar County's tight-knit community like wildfire. "She's stable," Dr. Mitchell announced to the assembled crowd. "The infection was worse than I thought, but she's a fighter. Military dogs are bred for resilience." She pulled Dutch aside. "I found something else during surgery. Old scar tissue on her left rear leg, consistent with shrapnel wounds. This dog has seen combat, Dutch. The question is, how did she survive what killed your son?" That night, Dutch sat beside Bella's recovery kennel at the clinic, the puppy, whom he'd started calling Scout, sleeping in a basket beside him. Bella was groggy from anesthesia but alert enough to watch Dutch's every movement. He'd called his old Marine buddy Tommy Kowalski in Virginia, now a military liaison with access to records. "Tommy, I need you to pull everything on my son's death. November 15th, 2009, Afghanistan. And I mean everything. Casualty reports, K-9 unit records, witness statements." Dutch's voice carried the authority of his old sergeant's stripes. "Something's not right about what they told me." 2 days later, Tommy called back with disturbing news. "Dutch, I found discrepancies in David's file. The official report lists both David and K-9 Bella as KIA, but there's a classified addendum I wasn't supposed to see. It mentions one survivor from that IED blast, a military working dog evacuated to Germany for medical treatment." Dutch's grip tightened on the phone. "What happened to that dog?" "That's where it gets weird, buddy. The dog was transferred to a rehabilitation facility, then the trail goes cold. No discharge papers, no adoption records, nothing. It's like she vanished from the system." Meanwhile, Bella's strength was returning daily. Dr. Mitchell marveled at her recovery rate, but Dutch noticed something else. Bella was training Scout. Despite her weakness, she was teaching the puppy basic commands using the same hand signals David had learned in K-9 school. When Dutch tried the signals himself, both dogs responded immediately. The breakthrough came when Dutch's granddaughter, Emma, now 12, saw a video her friend had posted on TikTok. "Grandpa Dutch, you're famous!" she squealed over FaceTime from California. "There's this video of you and Bella that has like 50,000 views." Dutch stared at his flip phone in confusion. I don't know what a TikTok is, sweetheart. Emma's teenage impatience showed through the pixelated connection. It's social media, Grandpa. Someone filmed you carrying Bella into the vet clinic, and now people are sharing it everywhere. They're calling it Ash, Bella, and Dutch. Mom's been crying watching it. The viral attention brought unexpected developments. A GoFundMe account appeared without Dutch's knowledge, organized by Earl's daughter in Omaha. Within 48 hours, it had raised $12,000 for Bella's medical care. Dutch was overwhelmed by messages from strangers, many fellow veterans sharing their own stories of military dogs, but the attention also brought unwanted visitors. Dutch was feeding Scout on his front porch when a black pickup truck pulled into his driveway. 3 men got out, 2 younger guys with prison tattoos visible on their forearms, and an older man with graying hair and the bearing of a soldier. The older man approached while the others hung back by the truck. "Robert Vanderberg?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Dutch. And you are?" "Marcus Caldwell." "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Dutch set down the puppy formula and studied the stranger. Something about Caldwell's military bearing and the way his eyes kept darting to the house suggested this wasn't a social call. "I don't know what you're talking about. The German Shepherd and her pup, they're stolen property, and I want them back." Dutch's hand moved instinctively toward the .45 he'd carried since Vietnam, now holstered under his flannel shirt. "Those dogs were chained and left to die. I saved their lives." Caldwell's facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, old man. That dog is worth more to me than your life." "Then you should have taken better care of her," Dutch replied evenly. Behind him, he could hear Bella stirring inside the house, probably sensing tension through the screen door. The standoff was interrupted by Pastor Williams's Honda Civic turning into the driveway, followed by Earl's truck. Caldwell's men shifted nervously, but Caldwell himself seemed unfazed by the arrival of witnesses. "This isn't over," Caldwell said, backing toward his truck. "That dog has history you can't imagine. I'll be back with proper paperwork." After they left, Pastor Williams helped Dutch move Bella and Scout to the church basement for safety. "Dutch, I've got a bad feeling about those men. Earl's calling Sheriff Morrison." That evening, Dutch sat in the church basement with Bella's head on his lap, Scout curled between them. He'd been thinking about Tommy's phone call and Caldwell's appearance. The pieces of a puzzle were starting to form, but the picture they created was ugly. His phone rang. It was Rebecca, his daughter, calling from California. Her voice was thick with tears. "Dad, I saw the video. I saw you with David's dog." She paused. "How is this possible?" "I don't know, honey, but I'm going to find out." "Dad, I'm flying out tomorrow. The kids want to meet their grandfather, and I want to help." Dutch felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since Martha's death. "Rebecca, I'd like that very much." The next morning brought another surprise. Dr. Mitchell called with news from Bella's blood work. "Dutch, I ran a genetic panel on both dogs. That puppy isn't Bella's biological offspring." "What do you mean?" "Scout is a purebred German Shepherd from a different bloodline entirely. Someone put them together, but they're not related. The question is why someone would chain a grown female with an unrelated puppy." Dutch's mind raced. If Scout wasn't Bella's pup, then why had she been protecting him so fiercely? Military dogs were trained to protect, but this seemed different, more personal. That afternoon, Rebecca arrived with Emma and Jake, Dutch's grandchildren whom he'd never met. The reunion was awkward at first, 15 years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them like morning fog. But when Jake, now 10, saw Scout and immediately dropped to his knees to play with the puppy, some of that fog began to lift. "He looks just like David did at that age," Rebecca whispered to Dutch as they watched the boy roll in the grass with Scout. Emma, more reserved at 12, approached Bella carefully. "Is she really Uncle David's dog?" "I think so, sweetheart. But there's a lot we don't understand yet." That evening, as they shared one of the church ladies' casseroles at Dutch's kitchen table, the first time he'd had family at that table since Martha's funeral, Rebecca asked the question Dutch had been dreading. "Dad, if Bella survived, could David have—" Dutch shook his head. "No, honey. I saw the photos. I identified his personal effects. David didn't make it home." His voice broke slightly. "But Bella did, somehow. And I think someone's been using her all these years." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Sheriff Morrison with news that would change everything. "Dutch, I ran those plates from the black truck. Vehicles registered to Marcus Caldwell, address in Kansas. But here's the interesting part. Caldwell was dishonorably discharged from the Marines in 2010. He was a K-9 handler who was court-martialed for animal abuse." Dutch felt his blood turn to ice. "What unit? 1st Battalion? 3rd Marines? Same unit as your son?" The revelation hit Dutch like shrapnel. Marcus Caldwell had served with David, had known his son, had possibly been there the day David died. Dutch's hands shook as he hung up with Sheriff Morrison, his mind racing through 15 years of unanswered questions that suddenly demanded answers. "Dad, what's wrong?" Rebecca asked, seeing his face go pale in the kitchen light. Dutch looked at his daughter, then at his grandchildren playing with Scout on the living room floor. "That man who came here today, he served with David. He was David's fellow K-9 handler." The weight of that knowledge settled over the kitchen table like a thundercloud. Rebecca's fork clattered against her plate. Then he would know what really happened to Bella. He would know why we were told she died. "More than that," Dutch said grimly. "He might know what really happened to David." That night, Dutch barely slept. He sat on his front porch with his .45 across his lap, watching the driveway while Bella lay at his feet. The dog seemed to sense his tension, her ears perked for any sound that didn't belong. Inside, Rebecca had made beds for the children in what used to be David's room, and Dutch could hear the soft sounds of his family sleeping under his roof for the first time in 15 years. At dawn, Sheriff Morrison arrived with FBI agent Janet Crawford from the Omaha field office. Agent Crawford was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who studied Bella with professional interest. "Mr. Vanderberg, we've been investigating a military dog trafficking ring that's been operating across the Midwest for the past decade," she explained over coffee. "Marcus Caldwell is our primary suspect. We believe he's been stealing military working dogs and selling them to private collectors, dog-fighting rings, and illegal security operations." Dutch felt his jaw clench. "You're telling me he's been trafficking dogs like Bella?" "Worse than that," Crawford continued. "We think he's been specifically targeting dogs whose handlers were killed in action, families who were told the dogs died too so no one would come looking for them." Rebecca gasped. "That's monstrous. How many families?" "We estimate at least 30 cases over the past 10 years. Caldwell would falsify death certificates, bribe records clerks, whatever it took to make these dogs disappear from official records." Dutch stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. "So David really did die, but Bella survived, and Caldwell stole her from me before I even knew she was alive." "That's our theory," Crawford said. "The question is, why did he keep her so long? Usually these dogs are sold within months of acquisition. Bella's been off the grid for 15 years. The answer came from an unexpected source. Emma, who'd been quietly listening from the doorway, spoke up with the brutal honesty only children possess. Maybe he kept her because she reminded him of Uncle David. Maybe he loved her but was too broken to take care of her right. The adults turned to stare at the 12-year-old, whose observation cut to the heart of something none of them had considered. Could Caldwell be another victim of war, damaged beyond repair but clinging to the last connection to a fallen friend? That afternoon, Dutch made a decision that terrified Rebecca. He was going to find Marcus Caldwell and get answers, not just for himself, but for every family who'd been lied to about their fallen soldier's canine partner. "Dad, you can't do this alone," Rebecca pleaded. "Let the FBI handle it." "Honey, this isn't about justice anymore. It's about understanding why someone would torture David's dog. Why someone would keep her alive for 15 years just to chain her in the desert to die." Dutch's voice carried the steel that had gotten him through 3 tours in Vietnam. "I need to look him in the eye and hear him explain it." Agent Crawford reluctantly agreed to let Dutch participate in the operation, provided he followed FBI protocol. They'd tracked Caldwell to an abandoned farm outside Hastings, Nebraska, about 2 hours south. Surveillance indicated he was operating some kind of training facility there, possibly preparing dogs for illegal fighting or security work. The drive to Hastings gave Dutch time to think about Emma's words. What if Caldwell wasn't purely evil but broken beyond repair? What if he'd kept Bella all these years out of some twisted loyalty to David's memory? Dutch had seen what war could do to good men, how it could warp love into obsession, duty into destruction. The Caldwell property was a study in decay, sagging barns, rusted equipment, fields gone to weeds, but Dutch's trained eye spotted the signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks, generator cables running to the main barn, the kind of temporary setup used for operations that needed to be moved quickly. Agent Crawford's team had surrounded the property, but she'd agreed to let Dutch approach first, hoping his veteran status might convince Caldwell to surrender without violence. As Dutch walked toward the main barn, he could hear dogs barking inside, multiple animals, all agitated. "Caldwell," Dutch called out. "I know you're in there. I'm alone, and I just want to talk." The barn door creaked open, and Marcus Caldwell emerged, his appearance shocking Dutch. The man looked like he'd aged 20 years since yesterday, his eyes hollow and haunted. Up close, Dutch could see the telltale signs of severe PTSD, the hypervigilance, the tremor in his hands, the way he moved like a man expecting attack from any direction. "You shouldn't have come here, Vanderberg," Caldwell said, but his voice lacked the menace from yesterday. Instead, it carried exhaustion that seemed to go soul deep. "I came for answers," Dutch replied, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. "About David, about Bella, about why you've been living a lie for 15 years. Caldwell's facade finally cracked. His shoulders sagged, and Dutch saw something devastating in his expression. Grief so profound it had calcified into madness. "You want to know about David?" Caldwell's voice broke. "He was the best Marine I ever served with, the best friend I ever had, and I got him killed." The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Dutch felt his own breath catch. "What happened that day?" "We were on patrol, working separate routes. David had intelligence about an IED factory in a compound about 2 clicks south of our position. He requested backup, but I was dealing with the situation with my own dog. Rex was acting up, wouldn't obey commands. I told David to wait, that I'd catch up." Caldwell's hands were shaking now. But David never waited for anything. He was always rushing toward danger to protect others. Dutch felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. By the time I got there, the compound was rubble. David had tried to disarm a booby trap to save civilian workers inside. The explosion killed him instantly, but Bella... Caldwell's voice trailed off. Bella was thrown clear, badly injured but alive. She kept crawling toward David's body, trying to wake him up. The image hit Dutch like a physical blow. He could see it all. His son's loyalty getting him killed, Bella injured and confused, trying to understand why her partner wouldn't respond. "The medic said she probably wouldn't make it," Caldwell continued. Shrapnel in her leg, internal injuries, severe trauma, but I couldn't let her die too. I couldn't face telling you that both David and his dog were gone because of my mistake. Dutch finally understood the twisted logic that had driven 15 years of deception. So you kept her. Made everyone believe she died with David. At first it was just until she recovered. I was going to send her home to you, I swear. But then she got better, and she looked at me like— Caldwell's voice cracked completely. She looked at me like David used to, like I was worth something. The tragedy of it all washed over Dutch. Two men destroyed by the same explosion, both carrying guilt that wasn't entirely theirs to bear, both clinging to the same dog as their last connection to a fallen hero. But that still didn't explain the chains, the abandonment, the cruelty of letting Bella nearly die in the Nebraska sun. The confession should have brought relief, but Dutch felt only the hollow ache of a man watching another soul destroy itself. Marcus, if you cared about her, if you kept her alive out of love for David, then why? His voice cracked with the question that had been eating at him. Why chain her to die in the sun like an animal? Caldwell's face contorted with a pain so raw it was difficult to witness. Because I couldn't save her anymore. Because everything I touch turns to ash. He gestured toward the barn behind him. You want to see what 15 years of guilt does to a man? Look inside. Against Agent Crawford's shouted warnings from her position near the tree line, Dutch followed Caldwell into the barn. What he saw there would haunt his nightmares for years to come. Makeshift kennels lined both walls, most empty now, but clearly designed for dozens of dogs. Medical equipment, training apparatus, and detailed records of transactions filled workbenches. This wasn't just trafficking, this was systematic exploitation. I started with good intentions, Caldwell said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Keeping Bella safe, maybe helping other military dogs find homes when their handlers died. But the money? God, Dutch, I needed the money for her medical care, for my own treatment. The VA wouldn't cover half of what we both needed. Dutch studied the records scattered across a desk. Names, breeds, sale prices, dozens of military working dogs sold to fighting rings, private security companies, collectors who wanted battle-tested animals. His stomach turned as he realized the scope of Caldwell's operation. These dogs trusted you, Dutch said quietly. They were trained to trust soldiers, and you sold that trust. I know! Caldwell exploded, the sound making both men flinch. Every goddamn day I know what I became, but I couldn't stop. The deeper I got, the more money I owed to people you don't cross. People who would kill Bella and me both if I didn't keep producing. Dutch found Bella's medical file among the papers. 15 years of veterinary records showing a pattern of injuries that made his blood boil. Broken ribs from training accidents, infected wounds from equipment malfunctions, malnutrition from resource management issues. You tortured her, Dutch said, his voice deadly quiet. For 15 years, you tortured David's dog. I never meant, Caldwell started, but Dutch cut him off. You chained her in the desert to die, Marcus. After everything she survived, after all the time she probably saved your miserable life with her loyalty, you left her to die of thirst. Caldwell collapsed into a folding chair, his head in his hands. I got diagnosed with lung cancer 3 months ago. Terminal. The doctors said maybe 6 months if I was lucky. He looked up at Dutch with eyes that held no hope. I couldn't take care of her anymore, couldn't pay her medical bills. But I also couldn't face giving her to another stranger who might hurt her. Dutch felt something cold settle in his chest. So you decided to kill her yourself. I thought it would be kinder than watching her starve when I died. Kinder than letting her end up in another fighting ring. Caldwell's voice dropped to a whisper. I sat in my truck for 3 hours with the gun in my hand, trying to work up the courage to put her out of her misery. but I couldn't pull the trigger. So I left her there and drove away, thinking the heat would be faster than starvation. The confession hit Dutch like a physical blow. This wasn't malicious cruelty. It was the broken logic of a man so consumed by guilt and self-hatred that he'd convinced himself torture was mercy. "And Scout?" Dutch asked. "Why was there a puppy with her?" Caldwell's face crumpled completely. "Scout was supposed to be my final gift to you. I'd been training him for 2 years, service dog protocols, specifically for elderly veterans dealing with grief and isolation. He was going to be delivered to your ranch with a letter explaining everything after I died." Dutch stared at the broken man before him, pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. "You were going to let me find them both dead. I was going to mail you Scout's paperwork and a letter about David. About how sorry I was. About how Bella died peacefully in her sleep, and Scout was a gift from your son's memory." Caldwell wiped his eyes with shaking hands. "But my cancer got worse faster than expected. I panicked, chained them together, and ran." Outside the barn, Dutch could hear Agent Crawford's team moving into position, vehicles arriving, radios crackling, the coordinated sounds of law enforcement preparing for the worst. But inside this decaying building, 2 broken veterans sat surrounded by the evidence of 15 years of compound tragedy. "David would hate what you became," Dutch said finally, "but he'd also understand why." Caldwell looked up sharply, as if he hadn't expected anything resembling forgiveness. "My son had a big heart, and a problem with trying to save everyone," Dutch continued. "He'd have spent the rest of his life trying to fix you. Probably would have gotten himself killed in the process." He paused, thinking of Emma's wisdom. "Maybe that's what Bella was doing all these years. Maybe she was trying to save you, too." Before Caldwell could respond, Agent Crawford's voice echoed from outside. "Federal agents, Marcus Caldwell, exit the building with your hands visible." Caldwell stood slowly, his movements those of a man carrying the weight of the world. "Dutch, before they take me, there's something else. About David's death. Something I never told anyone." Dutch felt his heart stop. "What?" "He didn't die trying to disarm a booby trap. He died pushing a family of 4 out of the way of a car bomb. The explosion that killed him saved 3 children and their grandmother." Caldwell's voice barely carried across the space between them. "Your son died a hero, Dutch. The biggest hero I ever knew." The words hit Dutch harder than any shrapnel ever had. The revelation about David's final moments shattered something in Dutch's chest that had been carefully held together for 15 years. His son hadn't died from reckless heroism, but from the purest kind of courage, sacrificing himself to save innocent lives. Dutch felt his knees buckle, and he gripped the barn wall for support as Caldwell's words echoed in the dusty air. "3 children. Dutch whispered, his voice breaking. "He saved 3 children. And their grandmother," Caldwell added, tears streaming down his face. "Amara, age 6. Hassan, 4. Little Fatima was barely 2. Their grandmother, Zara, was 73, just about your age now." His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if finally telling the truth was lifting a weight from his soul. "They send me letters sometimes through the Red Cross. The children are grown now. Amara's studying to be a doctor. She wants to help other children like her brother and sister." Dutch closed his eyes, seeing his son's face in that final moment. Not the reckless young Marine he'd worried about, but a man making the conscious choice to trade his life for others. It was exactly what Martha would have expected from the boy they'd raised, to believe that service meant sacrifice. But as the beauty of David's final act settled into Dutch's heart, a more immediate crisis was unfolding outside. Agent Crawford's voice carried a new urgency as she coordinated with her team. We've got movement in the tree line, multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Looks like Caldwell wasn't working alone. Through the barn's grimy windows, Dutch could see 3 black SUVs racing down the dirt road toward the property. Caldwell's face went white as he recognized them. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "They found me. Dutch, you need to get out of here right now." "These aren't people you can reason with." "Who are they?" "The people I owe money to. The ones who've been backing my operation for the past 5 years." Caldwell moved to a locked cabinet and pulled out an assault rifle. "They don't leave witnesses, Dutch. They're here to clean up loose ends." The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from outside as the SUVs disgorged armed men who immediately engaged Crawford's FBI team. Dutch's Vietnam instincts kicked in as he dropped to the floor, crawling toward better cover behind a concrete support pillar. "How many?" Dutch shouted over the gunfire. "At least 8, maybe more," Caldwell replied, checking his weapon. "Dutch, listen to me. In my truck outside there's a metal briefcase in the bed. It contains records of every military dog I've sold, every family I've lied to, and bank account numbers showing where the money went. Promise me you'll get that information to the FBI." Dutch looked at the man who'd caused him 15 years of pain and realized that Caldwell was prepared to die trying to make amends. "Marcus, we can both walk out of here alive if we work together." "No," Caldwell said quietly. "I've been dead for 15 years. I just haven't had the courage to lie down yet." The barn door exploded inward as 2 armed men in tactical gear rushed inside. Caldwell opened fire immediately, his military training evident in his precise shooting. Both men went down, but Dutch could hear more approaching from multiple directions. "Dutch!" Crawford's voice carried over the chaos. "We're pinned down out here. Can you secure the witness?" Dutch looked at Caldwell, who was reloading with practiced efficiency despite his trembling hands. The cancer had weakened him, but the soldier inside was still fighting. "I can get us to the back of the barn," Dutch said. "There's a gully that runs to the tree line. We can make it if we move now." Caldwell shook his head. "They'll hunt me down wherever I go. But you—" He pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket. "This is for you. David wrote it before his last patrol. I was supposed to mail it if anything happened to him, but I couldn't face your grief on top of my own." Dutch's hands shook as he took the letter, David's familiar handwriting visible through the worn paper. Before he could speak, another wave of gunfire forced them deeper into cover. "They're flanking us from the west," Caldwell observed with professional detachment. 3 minutes before they breached the back wall. That's when Dutch heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze. The distinctive whine of a German shepherd in distress, coming from one of the kennels in the barn's far corner. "There's a dog still in here," Dutch said. Caldwell's face crumpled. "Rex, my old partner from Afghanistan. He's blind now, too scared to move when the shooting started." Dutch didn't hesitate. Ignoring Caldwell's protests, he crawled toward the sound, finding an ancient German shepherd cowering in a makeshift kennel. The dog was clearly terrified but responded immediately when Dutch used David's old hand signals to calm him. "Easy, boy," Dutch whispered, working to open the kennel latch. "We're getting out of here." The back wall of the barn exploded as armed men blasted through with shaped charges. Caldwell returned fire, his position giving Dutch the cover he needed to reach Rex. But as Dutch lifted the 60-pound dog, he realized they were trapped. That's when the cavalry arrived. Sheriff Morrison's voice boomed over a megaphone. "This is the Cedar County Sheriff's Department. We've got the building surrounded. Weapons down, hands visible." Through the smoke and chaos, Dutch could see at least a dozen county sheriff's vehicles, plus what looked like Nebraska State Patrol tactical units. The community that had rallied around Dutch and Bella wasn't letting him face this alone. The tide of the battle turned quickly. Caught between federal agents, local law enforcement, and an increasingly desperate Marcus Caldwell, the gunmen began to surrender or retreat, but not before one final, devastating moment. As Dutch carried Rex toward what he thought was safety near the barn's side door, a single gunshot rang out behind him. He turned to see Caldwell falling, blood spreading across his chest from a sniper's bullet fired through the barn's north window. Dutch set Rex down and crawled back to where Caldwell lay dying. The man who had caused him so much pain was now looking up at him with eyes full of regret and something that might have been peace. "The letter," Caldwell whispered, his voice barely audible. "Read David's letter. Understand what kind of man your son really was. Marcus, tell Bella." Caldwell's breathing was becoming labored. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her David loved her. Tell her she's free now." Marcus Caldwell died as the sun set over the Nebraska plains, his final words carrying the weight of 15 years of guilt finally released. In the aftermath, as EMTs treated the wounded and FBI agents secured the scene, Dutch sat in the back of an ambulance reading his son's final letter by the light of emergency flares. Rebecca had arrived with the children, alerted by Sheriff Morrison, and they clustered around him as he read David's words aloud. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I want you to know that every day here, I think about the values you and Mom taught me. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Love without conditions. I've asked Marcus to look after Bella if something happens to me. She's more than just a working dog, she's family. Please welcome her into our family the way she welcomed me into hers. I know she'll bring you comfort when I can't. Most of all, Dad, don't let my death make you smaller. The world needs men like you, men who choose compassion over bitterness, love over fear. Take care of Mom, and maybe someday you'll get to meet your grandchildren. I hope they have your strength and Mom's heart. All my love, David. P.S. I've arranged for a surprise to be delivered to the ranch after my tour ends. His name will be Scout, and he's going to be the best companion an old rancher ever had." Dutch looked up from the letter to see Scout playing with his grandchildren near Agent Crawford's vehicle, and Bella, finally free of her chains, watching over all of them with the protective instincts that had kept her alive for 15 years. The truth was finally out, but it brought no satisfaction, only the hollow understanding of how much pain could grow from a single moment of loss. 6 months later, Dutch Vanderberg stood on his front porch watching his grandson Jake teach Scout to fetch a tennis ball in the yard where David had once played as a boy. The winter had been mild, allowing the family to settle into routines that would have seemed impossible during those dark August days when he'd first found Bella chained and dying. Rebecca had moved back to Nebraska with the children, taking a job as a school counselor in Columbus so they could stay close to the ranch. The foreclosure notices had stopped coming after the GoFundMe account reached $127,000, enough to pay off the mortgage and fund the nonprofit they'd established in David's memory. David's Legacy Canine Sanctuary now operated out of the renovated barn where they trained service dogs for veterans struggling with PTSD and grief. Bella had recovered completely, her weight back to a healthy 70 pounds, her coat glossy and thick. But more importantly, the haunted look had left her amber eyes. She spent her days working with Earl Thompson, who'd become the sanctuary's volunteer trainer, helping to socialize rescue dogs and teach them basic commands. At night, she slept beside Dutch's bed, her presence finally allowing him the peaceful sleep that had eluded him since Martha's death. The transformation in Dutch himself was perhaps the most remarkable. The man who'd poured coffee for a ghost every morning now woke to the sounds of his grandchildren getting ready for school. Emma, now 13 and fierce with teenage conviction, had become the sanctuary's social media manager, documenting every rescue and rehabilitation with the kind of passion that reminded Dutch painfully of David at that age. Grandpa Dutch, she called from the kitchen where she was editing videos on her laptop. The story about Rex just hit 10,000 shares. People are crying over that old dog learning to trust again. Rex, Caldwell's former partner, had been the most challenging rescue. Blind and terrified of human contact, the old German Shepherd had spent his first month at the sanctuary hiding in corners and flinching at any sudden movement. But Bella had worked patiently with him, and now Rex served as a therapy dog for elderly veterans at the VA hospital in Grand Island. Dutch smiled as he watched Jake demonstrate the hand signals David had taught him from the old training videos they'd found among Caldwell's possessions. The boy had natural instincts with the dogs, and Dr. Mitchell said he showed promise for veterinary work. Maybe he'll carry on David's legacy in his own way, Rebecca had suggested, and Dutch felt his heart swell with pride that spanned 3 generations. The legal aftermath had taken months to resolve. Agent Crawford's investigation had led to the arrest of 12 people involved in the military dog trafficking ring, and the recovery of 43 dogs sold illegally over the past decade. 26 families received letters informing them that their fallen soldier's canine partner was still alive, leading to reunions that made national news and inspired similar investigations in other states. The most difficult part had been testifying at Marcus Caldwell's posthumous hearing. Dutch had stood before a military tribunal and spoken about forgiveness, about how war damaged good men in ways that sometimes took decades to understand. The tribunal ultimately ruled that Caldwell would receive a military burial with full honors, his dishonored discharge posthumously changed to medical discharge due to combat-related PTSD. Dutch had been the only civilian at Caldwell's funeral. He'd stood at attention in his dress uniform from 40 years ago as they played taps, thinking about the young Marine who'd served beside his son and the broken man who'd died trying to make amends. Bella had been there too, lying quietly beside the grave as dirt was thrown over Marcus Caldwell's casket. And the viral fame had been overwhelming at first. Interview requests from national news programs, documentary filmmakers wanting to tell their story, publishers offering book deals. Dutch had declined most of them, but he'd agreed to appear on a Veterans Day special that raised another $50,000 for military dog rescues nationwide. "Sometimes I think Martha arranged all this from heaven," Dutch told Rebecca one evening as they watched Bella train a new arrival, a young Belgian Malinois whose handler had been killed in Syria. "She always said things happen for a reason, even when we can't see the reason yet." Rebecca smiled, stirring hot chocolate for the children. "Mom always was smarter than the rest of us." The ranch house that had echoed with loneliness now rang with children's laughter, barking dogs, and the constant stream of visitors who came to volunteer or adopt. Dutch's kitchen table, which had held only bills and notices for 3 years, now served meals to a dozen people most nights as volunteers, adoptive families, and fellow veterans gathered to share stories and hope. On Christmas morning, Dutch woke not to silence but to the sound of Scout's excited barking as the puppy, now grown into a magnificent 80-pound service dog, discovered the pile of presents under the tree that Rebecca and the children had decorated with military-themed ornaments and photos of David. As the family opened gifts, Dutch saved David's letter for last, reading it aloud again as had become their tradition. When he finished, Emma handed him a wrapped package. "It's from all of us," she said, her young voice thick with emotion. Inside was a leather-bound photo album titled David's Legacy. The first page held the original photo of David and Bella at Camp Pendleton. The following pages chronicled Bella's rescue, recovery, and new life, but also included photos of all the dogs they'd helped, all the families reunited, all the lives touched by their story. The final page held a new photo. Dutch, Rebecca, Emma, Jake, Bella, Scout, and Rex posed together on the front porch of the ranch, with David's memorial flag visible through the window behind them. Beneath it, Emma had written in her careful teenage handwriting, Family is not just blood. It's who you choose to save, who you choose to love, and who chooses to love you back. Dutch wiped his eyes and looked around at the chaos of Christmas morning. Wrapping paper scattered everywhere, children playing with new toys, dogs stealing bacon from unguarded plates, and Rebecca humming carols while making coffee for everyone. For the first time since Martha's death, he didn't pour 2 cups out of habit. He poured 6. "Martha," he whispered to the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, "our boy brought his family home after all." Outside, Bella was teaching Scout to track scents in the snow, preparing him for his certification as a therapy dog. Next month, Scout would begin working with veterans at the VA hospital, carrying on the legacy of service that connected 3 generations of the Vanderberg family. The chain that had once bound Bella to suffering had been broken, but the invisible chain that connected all of them, love, loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers and their dogs, would endure forever. As Dutch watched his grandson play with the puppy his uncle had somehow arranged to send home from war, he understood finally that some gifts take 15 years to arrive, but they're worth the wait. David's final mission hadn't ended with his death in Afghanistan. It had come full circle on a Nebraska ranch, bringing a broken family back together through the healing power of unconditional love. The story that began with Dutch finding a chained dog had become something much larger, a testament to the truth that love never dies, it just changes form and waits for the right moment to transform lives again. Friends, this story of Dutch and Bella reminds us that love never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to find its way home. How many of us have felt that crushing loneliness after losing a spouse, that sense that our purpose died with them? Dutch poured coffee for 2 every morning for 3 years, talking to an empty house, convinced his best days were behind him. But sometimes, God sends angels with 4 legs and wet noses to remind us that our hearts still have room to grow. When Dutch found Bella chained and dying, he didn't just save a dog. He rediscovered that his capacity for love hadn't died with Martha or David. The grandfather, who thought he'd lost his chance to matter again, became the patriarch of a blended family that includes not just his children and grandchildren, but every veteran and rescue dog who finds healing at David's Legacy Sanctuary. Bella's chains were broken in minutes, but Dutch's chains of grief and isolation took months to shatter. The beautiful truth is that it's never too late to begin again, to find new purpose, to discover that the love we think we've lost is just waiting for us to open our hearts one more time. What memories of lost loved ones still bring you comfort? Have you ever experienced an unexpected reunion that changed everything? Share your stories in the comments below. This community understands the healing power of sharing our journeys together.